So, an article came to my attention recently that brings up a valid point that I think about every time one of these adaptations comes out. They might not always be faithful, but, sometimes they, it doesn't even matter that they're not faithful. It's just the writing is so terrible. It's like the writers think they can do better, than the original author. A lot of times, like they're so full of their own hubris that it just translates on the screen. With Rings of Power, you got these fake platitudes like the stone and the ship and that, and and you got these, senseless plot lines running throughout the show. I have not seen Witcher Blood Origin, but I've heard that it's got like nothing to do with the actual lore of The Witcher. I've started getting into the Witcher books. I'm on the second one. I'm kind of almost done with it. Uh, and I'm really enjoying the books like way more than I enjoyed the show. Even though I love Henry Cavill. Uh, Rings of Power, I did not like. I've expressed that in other videos how much I did not like that. This article is titled "What Debates About the Faithfulness, quote unquote, of Blood Origin and the Rings of Power Miss." With major releases like Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, I just call it Rings of Power, it's not Lord of the Rings, and The Witcher Blood Origin, this year has seen the resurrection of an old debate about the nature of adaptation. What changes are acceptable in adapting a work from one medium to another? How faithful must an adaptation be to the source material in order to be considered true or great? Uh, he's going to be going into like how Peter Jackson's trilogy deviated from the lore, and we know this. Like he cut Tom Bombadil out, he gave Arwen more of a role, and other stuff like that. Like the sword was forged at a different time than it was in the books, the stuff like that. It is a debate that has become increasingly charged in recent decades as more pop culture is drawn from existing properties. These arguments, yeah, that's how these companies are making any money is by drawing from already existing IPs because they don't know how to create things anymore. Like they just take old things and redo them or translate them for a new audience, and it's not always viable. Like you're gonna run out eventually of things to readapt unless you just keep doing them over and over again, like we've seen with Spider-Man, Batman, other characters. These arguments about textual fidelity are very common. They allow the person making them to position their criticism as an argument from authority. After all, it isn't simply that the person in question doesn't give a given narrative or character choice. It is that the choice itself is wrong. Indeed, it's possible to frame the debate in overtly emotional terms. The change is a betrayal of the source material. It is proof that the people making the adaptation don't care about the work itself. I mean, that it does get that impression sometimes when the characters are so different than they are from the books, or they do things that you wouldn't see them do in the books, like you couldn't see them do. It's a very comforting approach to criticism, and it even has that whiff of objectivity about it that appeals to people who argue about media online. A difference between one version of a story and an adaptation of that story isn't a matter of taste. It is an objectifiably verifiable fact. The unspoken assumption that the difference must be bad is a matter of taste, but that often sneaks by into the subtext of the argument. It saves the hassle of actually engaging in discussion. See, I can see where he's coming from. He's saying, just because it's changed doesn't mean it's bad. However, we have seen many times where uh, a work is changed and the change is actually for the worse. Like, sure, we've gotten some adaptations that were really good, like Jurassic Park is a really good adaptation of the novel, even though it's different. I think I love the Hunchback of Notre Dame animated movie, even though it's completely different from the original novel. Like the original novel is like even way darker, uh, and the Hunchback is actually deaf in the novel, and Esmeralda dies in the novel. Things like that. Life of Pi is a good adaptation of the novel, and I don't think there weren't that many changes to that. That was actually pretty faithful. Um, trying to think. You got Little Women, the '90s movie. I think that was pretty close to the book. The newer one kind of changed things a bit. I didn't really like the newer one as much as the '90s one. I think it's the acting mostly though. See, that's the thing. You can have really good acting, really good, I don't know, direction, music and whatnot, and even a subpar story could still seem better. You know what I'm saying? Like it might not be a masterpiece, but you still like it because of other things. The thing about Rings of Power is I didn't really like anything about it. Like I didn't like the music. I didn't like the acting. The acting was bad to me, and the dialogue was bad, and just everything. Like the story made no sense a lot of times. So I was just hesitant to even watch Witcher Blood Origin. I didn't watch Witcher season 2 because even the first season it didn't feel like his show. Like it felt more like Yennefer's story than even Geralt's story, which is not how the books are. Like you're following Geralt the whole time. You know, it's all seen through his perspective. In the entire story. The Witcher Blood Origin is bad. That's what the article states. It also makes fairly substantive deviations from the established lore. These deviations themselves might be bad, but they are not bad because they are deviations. They are bad because they are poorly written, poorly judged, and occur in a narrative that was weak enough to begin with, even before it was hacked to pieces in the editing booth. The fact that Blood Origin is different from the source material is incidental. It would still be bad even if it were faithful. You see, that's the thing. You get really bad writers to write this established IP's adaptation. This is what you get. Same with Rings of Power. The two writers, the head showrunners, J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, they had like no experience. They had they weren't able to get credited on a Star Trek movie, Star Trek Beyond, the third one, the third of the new adaptations. And I think besides that, they had very little to their name. It's like a lot of times they couldn't get credit for things. However, unpacking all of that takes effort. It also involves some measure of subjectivity. There may well be people out there who greatly enjoy Blood Origin and who can make compelling arguments for their preference. See, my brother really likes Blood Origin. Mostly, I think, because of Michelle Yeoh. He's a big fan of her. So anything she's in, he'll watch, if she's kicking ass, like we just watched everything, everywhere, all at once, which is a mind fuck. I'll give you that, but it's got a really good story. Like the characters are really identified with, and yeah, you might not be able to follow the story altogether, but but I still like the characters. Their criteria for evaluating a work may be different. The argument that it is inherently bad because it is different serves to sidestep these potential arguments. It is a trump card that can be played at any moment in time, overriding the debate. I'm in the fans of Middle Earth group, and people are forever arguing about Rings of Power. Like half people hate it, half people love it, and so everybody's at each other's throats the whole time. But one of the arguments that people will say is like, "Oh, the Hobbit trilogy deviated from the lore, like totally." But yeah, the Hobbit trilogy isn't beloved, certainly not beloved as much as the Lord of the Rings trilogy. But even people are pointing out, even the Lord of the Rings trilogy deviated, though not as much as the Hobbit trilogy. The Hobbit trilogy was just like very much expanded because this was just one book that the studio decided we're gonna have three movies. Okay, we got three movies out of Lord of the Rings. That's because it was three books essentially. But yeah, we can get three out of the Hobbit, right? So they put new characters in. They brought Legolas in. which sort of makes sense when you think about it, because his father's a major character in the book, and Legolas would be around at this time. Um, Also, you get to see. See, I don't hate the Hobbit trilogy because you get to see things like you might not have otherwise gotten to see, like the White Council, uh, contending with the Necromancer, aka Sauron, at Dol Guldur, and uh, you get more with Thorin's father, giving Gandalf the ring and that, and then yeah, it's a lot of stuff like that that you get to know more of the characters. Like Thorin, you really get to know, and because in the books, in the Hobbit book, none of the dwarves are really you can't really identify with, like, they don't have a lot of distinguishing characteristics like they do in the movie. In the movies, my favorite one's the first Hobbit movie because it's the closest to the book, basically. Of course, any attempt to pull back and zoom out will reveal how arbitrary this criticism can be, as well as how it is often a mask for the preferences of the person making it. The Rings of Power is a useful case study here, given the number of complaints it has generated over its supposed betrayal of the source material. In particular, there has been a vocal strain of criticism concerning the show's treatment of Galadriel, Morfydd Clark, as something akin to an action heroine. It's just because she's like totally different from the Galadriel we know, even from the second age texts, the first age texts, and beyond. See, Amazon claimed that they had the rights to the appendices, but they didn't. They didn't even use the appendices in this show. Like, you can tell, like, because where is Celeborn at this time? He's supposed to be with Galadriel, and well, why is uh, why is she in this romance with Sauron? That's nowhere in the text. And defenders of Rings of Power would say, well, Tolkien didn't not say that this happened. Like, okay, he didn't not say, that Gandalf rode a unicorn into battle uh when he first showed up on the scene. He didn't say that Galadriel wasn't a trans woman. The Rings of Power invites comparisons to Peter Jackson's adaptation of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, of course, and it should, because that's the these are masterpiece movies that everything else that's adapted in Tolkien's world is going to be measured against. The production design evokes the movies. Yeah, the production design of Rings of Power evokes the movies, and sort of. It's much cheaper, and you can tell because some of the armor is just like shirts that look like armor. People pointed this out in videos before. Jackson's composer Howard Shore wrote the title theme. I'm not going to say anything bad about Howard Shore. I just did not like the theme to this one. And series composer Bear McCreary has talked about wanting to honor the legacy of what Howard Shore created. There were even early talks about Jackson himself being involved at the show. There is some suggestion that the Tolkien estate vetoed Jackson's involvement with the series, so that would explain why, when Jackson asked for a script, he never got one. If so, it seems that their long-stated distaste for his adaptations may have been a factor. Yeah, Christopher Tolkien did not like the Jackson movies. He claimed that they eviscerated the book by making it an action movie for young people aged 15 to 25. If Jackson's film adaptations weren't faithful enough to impress the son of J.R.R. Tolkien, then perhaps fidelity isn't the ultimate arbiter of a work's quality. Well, you can read Tolkien's letters and see that he himself was a very critical person when it came to adaptations. Like, you couldn't change a thing, or he just would not be happy. I feel like I would be the same way if anything I wrote was adapted. Like, what did you change? Hold on, wait. Unless it was something that I thought, in hindsight, I could have done better, maybe. If you read Ready Player One and watch the movie, they're totally different. But the movie itself was actually like co-written by Ernest Cline himself. So I feel like he may have, I don't know, he may have wanted to commercialize it more than the book itself was. I don't know if you know what I'm saying. Perhaps you do, perhaps you don't. But I'm just saying it's the creator's work first. Sure, it becomes everyone else's when it's out in the world, but it's still what they wanted to write. I don't know if you agree or don't. That's fine. Christopher Tolkien was not alone in accusing Jackson of altering the source material for the worse. Look, I understand that movies are not books, but that the pace requirements are different and that what's suspenseful on the page may not be suspenseful on the screen, acknowledged Kate Nefbu at Tor.com. But was it really necessary to create suspense through making so many characters self-centered, short-sighted, and ill-informed? By, in other words, diminishing them? I don't think she's talking about the Jackson trilogy. I think she's talking about Rings of Power, because they're the ones that are self-centered and short-sighted and ill-informed. None of the characters in the Lord of the Rings were like that. There remains a tension within the Lord of the Rings fandom between book fans and film fans. In many cases, the changes that book fans hate are the choices that film fans love. Most obviously, some book fans are vocal in their objections to the changes that Jackson made to Faramir in The Two Towers, and even labeling him far from the book Amir. Okay. However, film fans consider Faramir to be one of the most compelling members of the franchise's ensemble. Yeah, I really like Faramir in the movies. I don't remember much about his character in the books. See, I feel like he was more memorable in the movies, which I think is a good thing, because he does have this interesting character arc with his father and everything. Indeed, some of the criticisms of the Rings of Power have very specific echoes in early objections to Jackson's The Lord of the Rings. Book purists were furious that Jackson had expanded the role of Arwen to involve a horse chase in Fellowship of the Ring. See, that criticism I hadn't heard about. I heard about Two Towers, how they were going to have her at the Battle of Helm's Deep, and people were just furious about that. So they took the online forums and just they just let Jackson have it, and then he ultimately decided to take her out of that. Then we got what we got. There were criticisms that Arwen had been turned into an action heroine. In some ways, the fan reaction to the Lord of the Rings trilogy foreshadowed so much of what pop culture would become. As others have noted, there was a sense that Jackson and his collaborators were nearing the end of their polite tolerance of the meddlesome, scolding side of Tolkien fandom by the time that they were working on Two Towers. History appears to have vindicated the production team. Regardless of the changes that they made to the source material, the Lord of the Rings trilogy remains a singular accomplishment. It was Lord of the Rings as only Jackson could have made it. Yeah, we were very lucky to get the trilogy we got. Man, we were very lucky. There are more extreme examples of the liberties talented creators can take with source material. In 2006, Michael Mann reimagined Miami Vice for the 21st century. Although it was an extremely loose adaptation of the episode Smuggler's Blues, itself an adaptation of a Glenn Frey song, it cast aside much of the iconic look and texture of the classic series. Very little of the movie even took place in Miami. The movie was divisive when released, but has been reclaimed as a masterpiece. When Phil Lord and Christopher Miller made a 2012 cinematic adaptation of the 1980s television show 21 Jump Street, they reframed the high-concept police procedural as a self-aware spoof. Although the show had been successful enough to be the first hit on the young Fox network, there was minimal outrage over it. Yeah, that's because it was a very small. There's a very small fan base for that show. Like it's not as well known as Lord of the Rings. I mean, come on. Lord and Miller's adaptation was a comic highlight of the 2010s, and a movie successful enough to spawn an even more self-aware sequel in 22 Jump Street. Again, there is no one-size-fits-all approach to adaptation. Yeah, I think each one is a case study, like, in itself. If you took, I'm reading Paradise Lost right now, like, if you took that and adapted it, like, it would be picked apart to high hell, because everybody has their own vision of what this story should look like. It's a long poem about, Lucifer's fall to and his ascension to hell, basically. So yeah, everybody has their own interpretation of that. Like, everybody has their own vision of what Satan should look like. So yeah, you'll always get complaints, no matter what you do. Just try to make a good story. Is all I'm trying to say. When Dax Shepard adopted a similarly irreverent approach to his big screen take on 1970s motorcycle cop show Chips back in 2017, the results were catastrophic. However, Chips wasn't bad because Shepard hadn't shown suitable reverence to the source material any more than 21 Jump Street was good because Lord and Miller had embraced irreverence. Chips was simply a bad movie. Unfunny, uninspired, and unbearable. Faithfulness to source material is not an objective signifier of quality. If it were, Gus Van Sant's shot-for-shot remake of Psycho would be regarded as a masterpiece for the care with which it recreates Alfred Hitchcock's original. I have not seen that version. I've only seen the original. Instead, the movie was a critical and commercial flop. Van Sant's Psycho is perhaps most interesting as a piece of experimental art, and it is perhaps best experienced as Steven Soderbergh's mashup of the two films as psychos. In some ways, Van Sant's Psycho is a quietly influential film. Its legacy lives on in these debates that praise faithfulness as an unambiguous virtue, but more directly in the slate of Disney's live-action adaptations of its classic cartoons like The Lion King or Aladdin, which are often slavish in everything from soundtrack to dialogue to shot composition. The thing is, with these movies, they get kind of lazy. At Aladdin, it was a lot of CGI, and in Lion King, that was straight up CGI. I think there was just one shot that was actually in a real location. But yeah, there are changes to it too. Like the Lion King, they almost ripped Scar's song completely out. Like they just gave him this. It's like he's wording the song, but he's not really singing it. Which I thought was lame. Like if you're gonna give us Be Prepared, then give us Be Prepared, not some cheap knockoff version of it, dime store version of it. And then Aladdin, while I liked Will Smith as the genie, I feel like they I don't know, they could have gone balls to the wall with this movie. They played it safe. You know, uh, um I don't know. He's just not the comedian that Robin Williams was. So he was always going to be compared to him. It just was not as good. So yeah, while Disney, some of their live action adaptations added something new, like Cinderella, like even though I didn't care for it that much, was Maleficent. It took the story and turned it on its head. You know. And while I do not like the trope of casting villains into a sympathetic light, I did like Angelina Jolie's portrayal of Maleficent. So there is no acknowledgement of the differences between animation and live action or effects emulating live action. Adaptation is an art form like any other. Film, television, books, and video games are all different forms of media. They all work in different ways. What works in one will not necessarily work in the other, and there is no objective metric to measure the quality of an adaptation in one form to its source material in another. In many cases, the quality of the adaptation is largely independent of the quality of the object that inspired it. Yeah? The Rings of Power and Blood Origin are both shows with fairly significant problems. Copying and pasting lines of text directly from the source material will not fix the obsession that the Rings of Power has with mystery boxes and will not make Blood Origin's dialogue, characterization, or editing any better. It's a distraction from the real problems and often a way of cutting off more interesting conversations. It doesn't matter how faithful an adaptation is, simply how good it is. That felt like a mic drop at the end. Because yeah, he really understands that. Yeah, it doesn't matter if you deviate from the source material or not, as long as you write a good story and you execute it fairly well. I like that he pointed out that the Rings of Power writers were copying and pasting lines of text directly from not just the source material, but the movies, the Jackson movies that they said, they had to steer clear. Like they claimed to be separating from the movies, but clearly, when you watch the show, you can tell that they wanted you to think of the movies. Remember this thing that you love. Like, we're paying homage to that. So our show is just as good, if not better. I can't speak on Blood Origin, the dialogue, the characterization, or the editing, because I just had no interest in watching this show. But I'm reading the comments below this article, and yeah, they're pointing out what I was thinking. Like, fine, but don't squeal like a stuck pig and blame the fans of the original IP when they give you the finger and their opinion of your adaptation, and then blame them for the miserable ratings, which is fucking exactly what every failed miserable production, which is massively different in its adaptation of recent IP, has done. Mic drop. And then the guy right below him says, agreed. While I don't consider faithfulness to the original to always be the right course of action, if you decide to take liberties with the source material and audiences end up disappointed, either because the element you changed was fundamental to the work in question or because the particular change you made is significantly worse than the original, then you have no right to complain that audiences don't like it, nor tell them to get over themselves. I mean, you have a right to say it, but you shouldn't expect to be taken seriously. Yep. We had this thing now where you can sue a studio for putting out a trailer, and false advertising in the trailer. I was like, good, because they've been doing that for years. We should start taking shit back for real. Indeed, some movies, shows that adapt books change the material so much that the fact that they use the name of the book at all in the title borders on false advertising. I think I'm gonna end it here, though. That's enough for right now. Let me know what you think in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.